Welcome back to Light the Fuse, your one-stop shop for all things Mission Impossible and some things. What else, Charles? What else do we talk about on the show?
Hi, Drew. I'm Charles, and we're here to talk about Mission Impossible mainly, right? I mean, what else do we? What is? I mean, we talk a little bit about other movies.
We talk about life. We talk about love.
Yes, we talk about trying to earn the respect of our fathers.
Yes, something we both have failed miserably at.
Yes, it's eluded us so far.
One day it'll happen. But, mostly Mission Impossible. We are really excited today because we are talking to somebody who we have been hounding for a while. I know we say that about a lot of our guests, but we really mean it with him. We are talking to Bryan Burk, who is the producer of Ghost Protocol and Rogue Nation. Weirdly, Bad Robot was on 3, or maybe they weren't on 3. Maybe just JJ was on 3. Bad Robot hadn't joined the family yet, but he used to run Bad Robot.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So he did not. Bryan Burk did not produce 3, but he has some good stories about 3.
He does have good stories about 3.
Yeah, and I think we chase down all of our guests. Some are harder to chase down than others, but this one, we finally got Bryan. We had to convince him. We had to do another Zoom with him. Remember that several months ago, where we just got on to talk to him to convince him that we weren't psychos.
Yeah, he also was trying to ask us who he wanted so that he could just have them go on the show instead of him.
Yeah, yes.
But
he was bargaining. He was trying to get out of it.
Yeah. That was great. We talked to him for like an hour and a half then, and we talked to him for another hour now. So yeah, we have plenty of things to talk about.
Yeah, it's a 2-parter. Great stuff. And there's a lot of things to talk about with him. Can't wait for you to hear it. So let's get into it, I guess, right, Drew? If you got some people you need to give a shout out to.
Yes, you're right, Charles. This episode is brought to you by Jeremy Dillon and his podcast, My Favorite Album. It's also brought to you by John B., Elvis Ripley, and Suchet. Without them, we could not make this podcast. So thank you to them.
Big thank you to them for all their support. And without further ado,
here we go.
Bryan Burk.
And we're back with Bryan Burk, a man we have been chasing for months now. When was that? When was the Ghost Protocol screening?
Oh, is that when we first talked at the Ghost Protocol?
Yeah.
That was like the late 70s, early 80s.
Late 70s, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, the IMAX screen. It was at IMAX headquarters, right? That's where it was.
Oh, the one we just had.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. That was when was that? It was like 6 months ago, give or take.
Yeah. So we've been chasing people for years. So this is actually our courtship is not super long.
I apologize for the delay.
No problem at all.
Well, tell people who you are, how you got involved with Mission Impossible. You were running Bad Robot, right?
I was definitely not running Ghost Protocol. I was producing partners with J.J. Abrams, and J.J. first did Mission Impossible 3, where he was not a producer. Paul and Tom were the producers on that movie, and then after they finished Mission 3, and Tom wanted JJ to produce the 4th Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol, by default, I came along on that project with JJ. So that's how I got involved with...
So you were unwilling.
I was more than willing, to say the least. It's funny because my first brush with a really big film was when JJ was directing Mission 3. And when I went on set for that, it was crazy. Like, to see the size of that production and how things get made at that size and that scope was really just astonishing. So having the opportunity to go in and do that on Mission 4 on Ghost Protocol was... I say this all the time, which is when you think about your fantasy when you're a kid and you really want to be in the film business, what you realize is what you really want to do is regardless of what you want to do, it's the opportunity to work with those crews. And you realize that all of them, and I've worked with some amazing crews all over the world. And then you realize that kind of like at that level, they just came off of like the last James Bond movie, and they're about to go do the next Steven Spielberg movie. And for like a window, you get to work with all of these people who are at the top of their crafts, and every single person. And that's the luckiest part of it all. Like, you just watch people who are so good at what they do that's really what you know your kind of fantasy is when you're growing up, is to work with all of these people who are, it's such an incredible experience to be around them, and see how they do everything. And you know, I'm disposable. I happen to be a producer who's in the right place at the right time, but they're not. And it's really it's amazing to have that opportunity. So I first kind of brushed against it on Mission 3 as an outsider, and then was really lucky to get to do it on multiple projects. But you know, to see it, you know, at that level in the world that, you know, Tom creates is amazing.
Well, how did that go about, that the Bad Robot was brought in for Ghost Protocol? Was it like he wanted JJ to direct again, and then it ended up being a production deal, or how did that happen?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I think when Tom has those good experiences, he often talks to the directors about doing it again. And what was unique about those films, in my opinion, and now obviously Chris is directing them all, and there's no one better to be directing them all, was just the idea that he like kind of rotated directors and kind of had gave different people the opportunity to kind of play in their space. And I think JJ, I can't speak for him, but I think he, from my point of view, had the opportunity to do his version of it and wanted to have someone else try it. So because they had a good experience, I believe Tom had wanted to, you know, have JJ come aboard and be a producer on the film. And that's how we got involved.
So talk to us about how you landed on Bird, on the subject of the producer. Were there other people in the mix? Do you remember anybody else's name that came up?
No.
I know that there was a meeting with, we've heard there was a meeting with Edgar Wright at one point.
There might have been, because we love Edgar and, like, you know, talk about doing things with Edgar all the time. To be honest, I can't remember. I remember having conversations with a handful of directors, but they were very kind of general. And I don't really have a record. It's funny because I've gone back and listened to your podcast, which, by the way, is awesome. And I remembered how much I don't remember. And so it's interesting. And also everyone has their own point of view, which is no surprise. But I can only tell you that I don't remember any serious conversations with anyone. Like there definitely could have been a conversation with JJ and Edgar where he said, you know, hey, you want to do Mission Impossible? But that's because anything Edgar says he wants to do, we'd go do with it. And, you know, it's one of those people I just love unconditionally.
But you don't remember any other names that came up at the time?
I really don't. I remember, like, I think we had, I'm mixing up my projects right now in my head, but I think we just had like kind of general meetings with a handful of directors that we liked. And then Brad's name came up, and I can't remember if it came up. It might have, we were talking about him a lot. Michael Giacchino was obviously good friends with him and had already worked with him before. I remember my first time meeting him was at our offices at Bad Robot. And as you know, having spoken to him, and I'm sure met him, he's just infectious and loves movies. So immediately we were just talking about all the things we love. And, you know, very quickly it came together. Like there was no hesitation, and, you know, no one's a bigger fan of his than Tom. So it just felt like, oh, this is going to work.
Was there one thing that Bird said? Do you remember his 5 things that he wanted to do in the movie? He always talks about how he had a list of 5 things he wanted to accomplish in this.
I don't remember those 5 things. What I do remember vividly as we were going through it was, and it's kind of informed everything I do, and it seems so obvious, and it's really not, which it was talking a lot about the tone and the tone of the movie. And you kind of forget that when you're working on a script or reading a script, it's always through your eyes. So no one has the exact vision of what it's going to be. And we just talked a lot about the tone of what we wanted it to be. And he really referenced Raiders of the Lost Ark a lot. And he referenced it in the sense that it was really emotionally swinging like a pendulum back and forth in really big ways. And that it's a much darker movie than you remember. Like people get shot in the head and it's vicious, but it's also really funny. And the way that it kind of emotionally just goes from boom, 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 like funny, tragic. So you forget, like, the biggest laugh in the film when Indy confronts the guy with the big sword and ends up shooting him is you forget that 2 minutes later, Marion is ostensibly killed. And it happened so fast. So what he wanted was to create a film where it could be funny and really funny, and then immediately tragedy over and over and over. And, I thought he really exemplified that in the scene in the Burj when Benji's running in and there's a lot of comedy about that was so hard and all of that, what he was talking about. And then there's plenty of levity that's going on in that scene. And then immediately the case is gone. And so that idea of going from funny and exciting to immediately disaster is what I think Brad was really kind of going for, and the tone of that. And because of that, I think, in my opinion, I think the movie shifted to more comedy in Ghost Protocol than the previous ones. And I think that was because Brad very clearly had the tone of what he wanted it to be and was able to take us all along and to shift it because we had a North Star that we all agreed on.
Right. You got to collaborate with a bunch of Bad Robot folk between Nemec and Applebaum and Damon. Can you talk about that process?
Well, JJ had already spoken to Josh and Andre about coming on. You have to remember when I started working with all of them early on, I was brought on to Alias in the middle of the first season, and I can't remember if I don't think Josh and Andre were already on the show. They might have been, but most of what I learned on my journey as a producer was from around everyone else. So I learned a lot about the process of writing and television from Josh and Andre long before I was producing that film. And I learned no shortage of things from Damon Lindelof, who really changed my entire career. And when I started working on Ghost Protocol, there is absolutely no one in the world who I learned more about making movies from than Tom, who, as gifted and talented and special and unique as he is as an actor, he's equally as much as a producer. And he just changed my whole thought and process of how to make movies. So the opportunity to work with all these people, I wasn't the one who brought in Josh and Andre, but I'd worked with them before, so we already had a shorthand. Damon, at the end of the project, I'm pretty sure might have come from my wanting to bring in him and suggesting it. It was an interesting process at that point because I'd spent so much time, as lucky as what I'm about to say, like working on actual productions and in the trenches, that I didn't have as much time to go and discover other writers. So part of the reason why we worked with a lot of people we knew is because they were the people we already knew, and they'd kind of fall into our circle and we would meet them. So I didn't know a lot of writers who might have been available at that time who we could call on short notice and say, hi, can you come in and help us? And in my head, Damon is always at the front of my mind. So I don't know if this is exactly answer your question, but that's how.
Yeah, that's great.
Do you remember what? Because Damon came in later, right? And
right.
For some reshoots, right? And do you remember what some of the stuff was? That I think there's the airport scene before they go to India, right? And then the last scene.
Yes, I candidly I don't remember specifically what he did. I think the very last scene, Chris McQuarrie was, to say the least, invaluable in that. It's literally the smallest possible word I can use for what Chris did on that film. And he was only there officially for like 3 weeks, but his role, it's why he got the Mission franchise. And I mean, obviously it's Tom's to give, but in my opinion, in those 3 weeks, he said, unofficially, he said to Tom and everything, you could see, that he is uniquely different than any other writer and now director that I've ever worked with. And to see him do what he did at that process. And we were all really burnt out at that point. So I think we knew what we wanted to be, but we didn't know how to get to what we wanted to be. And we were just going a little bit in circles. And he was able to take all those pieces and say, no, it's not, it's over here. And just allowed us to see the forest for the trees in a way that he did very quickly and brilliantly, and he just elevated it from here to here.
And those 3 weeks, that was when you were in Vancouver? Is that when he came in?
It was I'll tell you exactly how it worked, which is, I don't know how all the Mission movies work. I know Mission 3 was different because JJ had a long time that he was working on it. I think like a year before he got started. And on Ghost Protocol, it was a very unusual experience. Let me rephrase that. If you're in television, let alone network television, it's not unusual at all because you're kind of writing as you go along. So in that crazy process, when you get a show picked up, you spend 3 or 4 months working on the pilot, and you may have spent 6 months or a year before writing that one episode. And then overnight, the network says, hey, great, we want you to do it. By the way, we need 21 more of them. And you start shooting in 2 months and it airs in 3 months. Go. And you've only vaguely thought about it. So, kind of and by the way, you can't fail and all of them have to be good. And so that world I'm comfortable with. But Mission was unique in that way because, and I'm sure you've heard this, I've heard other guests talk about this, where you kind of know what it is. And Josh and Andre wrote kind of a great script for a jumping off, particularly since they're from that world too, which is you're just constantly rewriting. I listened to their podcast with you and how it just changes so fast as it goes along in a television way, which I love. But now you're shooting, you don't get to move everything. So we would start front loading everything, and we put all the action sequences first because we knew that, X, Y, and Z would be happening. We kind of knew what was in the briefcase, but how it got from point A to point B was a little fuzzy. And Josh and I were also unique in the way that, unlike, and at least I hadn't experienced this before, where they came along, is why they ended up being, I think they got producer credits on the movie as well, because they came with us on the whole journey. It wasn't like, here's your script, I'll see you later. They came to Prague, they came to Dubai, they came to Vancouver. They didn't leave. And they were constantly writing over and over and over, which I've since learned during the Rogue Nation process, because it was the same thing. And you'd be just churning out these pages nonstop as you were going. And we still had that hiccup that was mostly in the Burj, all the sequence that took place in there. It was working, it just wasn't, it was 90% there. Okay. It just didn't click in the same way. And so Brad kept saying to me, don't forget, Brad's a writer as well. So he just kept saying, don't worry, we'll get to Christmas and we'll just kind of clean it up a little bit. Josh and Andre are totally doing it, but, he'll step in and together they'll all just work on it. So Christmas comes, we get our first break. And I remember going up to his home in San Francisco, and we sit down. I'm going to spend the weekend with him and the family, and we sit down on the couch. And I have this picture of Brad sitting opposite me, passed out. 10 minutes into the conversation, he's out. And I realize, this is not going to go the way we had anticipated. So I had a conversation. At first I spoke to JJ about we need to bring in a writer to work with Josh and Andre, who, again, they only needed just for a fresh perspective of someone to come in. And Damon wasn't available. And I didn't know what to do. It's now, the break is over. We're all up in Vancouver. I think it was the day before I was heading up to Vancouver. And I had no idea of who could come in to help. And we were about to start shooting those scenes. The sets were built. And I called Mark Evans, who was president of Paramount at the time, and a good friend. You're in the trenches with everybody. So we were in the trenches for a long time, Mark and I. And I said, Mark, I have an issue. I can't find a writer, and we got to fix this. And he said, well, he goes, my recollection is, he goes, well, I don't know what writers, I don't have any. And I'm like, you're the head of a fucking studio. How do you not know what writers to use? And he said, well, he goes, Chris McQuarrie just turned in a draft of Jack Reacher. Would he be able to do it? And I said, well, I'm a fan of Chris. If he's available, I'll run it past Tom or some version. So I called up Tom immediately. And I said, we have to bring on someone. What about Chris McQuarrie? And it was really interesting. For maybe 5 seconds, he didn't say a word. Okay. What you knew was his wheels were instantly spinning. Now he was developing Jack Reacher, which wasn't happening, officially yet. They were writing it. And he'd obviously already done Valkyrie before. And it was just dead silence. And then immediately he goes, Chris McQuarrie. Yes, Chris McQuarrie. And picture that in Tom's voice. And it was like he was both feet in, like that quickly. Okay. And that was that. And so we reached out to Chris and very quickly made a deal. And we all kind of flew up, and Chris was there 24 hours later. And that's how Chris came aboard on that project. And it was so interesting because I vaguely knew him a little bit. We had no shortage of friends, from college on. But it was the first time I really spent some time with him. And I really liked him a lot. And again, there's no one who loves movies, let alone knows them more than him. Like it's in his blood. But then to watch him work, it was uniquely different than anyone I'd worked with before, to a fault for me. Like I didn't know how to support that process. And don't forget, I'm also dealing with the ticking clock because, I have Paramount breathing down my neck because they're like, we're lighting money on fire and Chris hasn't written yet. And, I kept having visions of the Apocalypse Now story with Marlon Brando showing up for that 1 week and doing nothing. And that wasn't Chris. He was definitely like in the trenches and trying to learn it. But I just kept waiting for like pages to be written, and because we're shooting in like 4 minutes. And it was one of the few times, now that I think about it, that Tom was a little pissy with me, to be honest. Not ever. Like I love him, but just because I was pressuring in a weird way where I wasn't acting like a good producer. I was more worried about the money and the time and less about it creatively at that time. And again, it was another time where Tom was really showing me the forest for the trees for my own process as a producer. And as always, he was 100% right. And anyway, I just remember that incident where it was early on because I was pressuring Chris in a way he didn't need to be pressured. He had his own pressure. And then the pages came and they just kept coming. They worked. That was the amazing thing, because it wasn't a process really of like giving notes and trying to get to where we wanted it to be. It immediately got to where we wanted it to be. And it was a unique, different experience to be working with a process that I didn't really understand. And I'm sure you're going to ask me what that process was, but it was it was just nothing I'd seen before with other writers.
Was that because I know he like reviewed all the footage of what you had so far, right? And then he was...
Well, he did that to get up to speed. Obviously, he needed to do that. But it's so interesting because he simultaneously... There's a million reasons why he's really talented and gifted. But what was interesting is he's like overly analytical and also is able to be really emotional. And that combination is what I think makes him who he is. And we would often have this is rearing into Rogue Nation, but we would often have conversations where he would say, there's only two ways that this can work. And in my head, I'm thinking, what are you talking about? There's like an endless version of what it could be. But then you realize, he's gone through every iteration that won't work and that won't work and that won't work and that won't. But this could work and that could work. Okay. And you're like, yeah, but what about, and he can immediately explain to you why it won't. So in that time when he was processing it, he just really was processing it and understanding what we had and how we had to do minimal amount of work to go back and fix some of the holes or the dead end roads we had gone down. And remember, he's doing this on set. Like we are shooting and in 2 seconds, we're going to go do something else tomorrow. And again, it's funny to me that he hasn't done more television. I'm not sure about his television career, but he would flourish in television because the speed of it and his ability to be able to very quickly like cut through all the garbage and then solve problems, but not solve them just with plugs. Like he elevates it at the same time. It was really fascinating to watch him do what he did, let alone to have Tom embrace it so quickly. Because I could talk, and I'm sure I'm about to, like ad nauseum about watching Tom's process, but it's to watch how in sync they were so early on and knowing how close they are now, it's not surprising at all. Like he is, they're really a really a really great partnership.
Well, speaking of Tom, obviously the other interesting thing is that Ghost Protocol was seen, I guess, by some people as the potential final movie for Tom. And I wanted to know how, as a producer, you were navigating this, and a lot of different, a lot of different voices in the room about sort of the direction that the franchise was going to take. Did you ever think this was going to be the last one starring Tom? I mean, what was your kind of read on everything?
My read on everything is, if you read everything you're reading in the trades, then you're going to be off about everything. And it was just a lot of noise, and there was never zero conversations about that, except there was one meeting Tom wasn't even there. Now that I think about it, we had one meeting with then Brad Gray, who was the head of the studio, and it was myself, and it was JJ, and it was Brad, and it was Rob Moore, who was another one of the heads of the studio, and I'm pretty sure Mark Evans was there. It was a very small group of us, like in Brad's back secret office, and we'd had no real formal conversation with them yet, and it was very early in the process. I think we had just cast Jeremy. I think we had already cast, I think Paul, like we still had some of the cast was already there, but it was very early. And we were in there like just kind of trying to get the lay of the land and everything. And Brad said very clearly, he said, there's a lot of noise out there. I'm paraphrasing and making up all this. But basically what he said is, there's a lot of noise out there about this being like Tom's last movie. And remember, there was all the baggage of Sumner Redstone on Mission 3 and, all of his shit with Tom. And he said, just to be really clear, we're never making a Mission Impossible movie without Tom Cruise. And then we said, we're only here because of Tom Cruise. We're only interested in doing a movie with Tom Cruise. And we're all on the exact same page. So there was never any conversation about anything except for amongst ourselves all saying that, yeah, it's just noise.
Right. How was it working with Brad Bird as a first-time filmmaker? Live action filmmaker.
Yeah. It's, I had already done Star Trek, but on Star Trek, I was by far the lead producer on that film. And there were like 5 of us producing that film. Plus JJ was producing and directing. So this was like kind of the first one where I went off and was doing it. So I was in a different headspace, to say the least. And Brad is so meticulous, but in a very interesting way where, you kind of plan your shots and you kind of go in, and in the morning you kind of set up the shot. Everyone knows what it is. And you're usually shooting like within an hour or something like that, if you're kind of up and running. Never happened. And we would start like at the end of a day, we would start going to sets the night before, so Brad could like kind of figure it out, and we'd show up the next day thinking, oh, okay, now he knows the shot we're going to go. Never happened. And it's because he would always show up and immediately start walking around over and over and over, desperately not wanting to do the scene the way someone else would have done the scene. And he would walk around a lot and keep saying, oh, yeah, this, and would go on for, and I'd be just, again, like, we're going to get so screwed here because, hours are going by and we haven't shot. And maybe everyone else has a different memory of this, but this was my memory, okay? And he'd be trying to figure it out. He'd be like, no, and Bob Ellsworth, who's literally the greatest DP and wonderful, Bob would be interjecting things, and everyone would be like interjecting. Brad would be like, oh, yeah, and he like kind of, you've spoken to Brad. So that's probably fairly accurate. And he'd walk around. And then eventually he'd like kind of find the shot. And they were always just different than what you would have thought was obvious. And without exception, every single day we made our day. Like he never went over. It's once he knew what it was, he would get it over and over and over. And for a while I was just always like, we're just getting lucky that we're making the days. And I just realized that's his process. I thought because he was an animation director that he would really come in with everything already mapped out. We'd have his storyboards and he would do this and whatever. It was not that at all. I'm going to give him the biggest compliment ever, which is, did you ever see that that Kubrick documentary on the making of The Shining. It's like 17 minutes.
Yeah, the one that his daughter made. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you see Kubrick movies, they're so precise that you know he must have gone in and knows exactly what he wants. And then you see that one sequence where Nicholson is locked inside the freezer, and he's leaning his head against it. And you see Cooper walking around. He's like, no. He's trying to figure out the shot. And then he just lays down on the ground and looks up. And then all of a sudden it cuts to the shot. And you're like, oh, it this kind of magic thing where he finds it. That, for me, is what it was like with Brad, the entire production. Where he'd come in and he knew what he wanted it to be, but not really. And he would walk around until he found it. And when he found it, that was it. Like, he was locked in. But he was never rushing, and never, he just wanted them all to be, unique for himself and then obviously for the audience. And I think he did that. So that was really like a great experience. That, and also, again, he perpetually just wants things to be different and unique and to find his voice. It's why The Incredibles is The Incredibles. And it's why Iron Giant, you know what the average version of all those movies are. Like, but that's not what he does. And even when you watch those movies, it's why we knew he could do a live action movie, which is they're all framed and shot and performed like normal movies that just happen to be drawn. So he's a real filmmaker and is never settling. To watch him do it, it was an exhausting shoot. To have your career sitting in a room doing an animated film for years. I'm not trivializing that by any stretch. Doing anything creative is hard, but you don't have to like be breathing in sand and dying in the middle of a sandstorm. And he did. He really kind of stepped up and did it, and kept pace with Tom, which is impossible. And he did.
Hello, kiddies. It's me, the evil witch. Welcome back.
Did you just open a creaky door and
Yes.
step out and greet some trick-or-treaters? Is that what you're doing now to come out of the
Yes.
interview? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Nope, I'm sure all of you out there have emboldened him in ways that I really just, I'm not happy. Thank you for, no thank you, actually, to all of our supporters out there, listeners who messaged and said, Drew, we love what you do. Keep doing it. So now you're getting what you asked for.
I'm drunk with power.
Yes, he is.
So yeah, Bryan Burk, part 1. Love him.
Yes. Oh, man. So many good stories in here. I mean, I loved hearing him talk about Brad Bird. I think we've heard about that from previous guests as well, but just about, Berkey must have been in the room when Brad Bird first pitched Ghost Protocol, like his version of Mission Impossible 4, and just him, how much he zeroed in on the tone of the movie when he pitched it. I loved hearing about this because the tone of Ghost Protocol, I think we're just basically obsessed with. I mean, it's so fun and great and funny and awesome, and it's what really made us fall in love with the franchise. And, Brad Bird referencing Raiders of the Lost Ark and how it would go from being vicious to funny to tragic. I mean, I can't say enough about how much that tone has helped basically mold the franchise to what it is. I mean, obviously McQuarrie has taken it to a new place, but it still goes back to that humor and it still goes back to that team element and everything. And yeah, oh man.
We're big fans of Ghost Protocol, and seeing that in the theater, we've talked about it a million times, but it really was. Yeah. It was huge.
Creating the vulnerable hero out of Ethan.
Yes.
I know that people talk about the vulnerability of him with his personal life in 3, but I mean him as a character and the way that he approached situations. The vulnerability that was added to the character really came in Ghost Protocol. The reluctance to do some of these things and the situations that they come up with having to climb the Burj and stuff, that defines Ethan's character from that point on in the series.
Yes. It's the best. We love it.
Yeah.
What else, Charles? What else do we need to talk about as we wrap things up here?
Well, he talks about the rumors of Cruise being pushed out of the franchise, and he was saying don't believe everything you read in the trades. But then he also goes on to say that he was in the room when Brad Bird said to Brad Gray. Like, there's a lot of noise out there about a mission without Tom Cruise, and I'm telling you right now, I'm only going to do a Mission Impossible movie with Tom Cruise or whatever. So it's like, it sounds like there was some noise there. I mean, there's something going on there.
Trying to say where there was smoke, there might have been a little fire.
A little bit of fire, and maybe there was a fuse that was lit there somewhere. Yeah. But as always, thankfully, we've still got Tom Cruise making these movies for us. And then the only other thing I had was I just loved hearing about Brad Bird's shooting process. That he'd never get his first shot off by 10 a.m. and it always seemed like, oh my God, we're going to be late. But he would like take a long time to figure out what the shot was, and then once he did, it was always something really unique that you didn't expect, and then they'd somehow still always make their days. I loved hearing that.
Yeah, that's interesting because he obviously came from animation, so you maybe think that it's all been planned out ahead of time.
Yeah,
but to know that there is that spontaneity and sort of improvisation is really, it's nice because I think that you and I talk about how things can be prevised to death.
Yeah,
that was definitely not the case here.
I loved hearing that story. That was great. Just about the process of a director is just really awesome to hear that. Brad Bird, awesome, love it. That's all I've got. I've got some special thank yous I've got to give.
Go ahead,
if you will allow me.
Of course, the floor is yours.
So I want to give a special thank you to John Cudney, Nathan Lawrence, and our friends from Texas. Thank you to John, Nathan, and our friends from Texas for making this episode possible. We really appreciate all of our Patreon members so much. It's patreon.com/LightTheFuse. And if you want to sign up, you probably should sign up now because you're running out of time to sign up for the Patreon. Is that okay to say? What do I say,
what,
Drew?
Charles? Whoa.
I don't know.
I've just gotten a handle on what a Patreon is.
I know. I've been explaining this to you now for weeks and weeks.
Geez.
Now that you know what it is,
it's going
we
away.
Might be running out of time for those of you out there on a Patreon. We'll give you more information on that later, but I think for now you should sign up for the Patreon if you can. And we really appreciate it. It helps. And you can get access to all of our bonus episodes. We've done hundreds of bonus episodes now, right? Is it like over 200 bonus episodes?
Oh, God, I don't even want to think about it. Every week is a trial.
If you want to get access to that, you should sign up before the end of the month to see if you can listen to all of our old bonus episodes breaking down a whole bunch of stuff relating to the movies, these movies and other movies, our favorite movies, best movies of the year, all that kind of stuff. It's a great fun resource. And I think that's it, right, Drew? Oh, actually, no, I'm sorry. We should tell people to go to our website, lightthefusepodcast.com, check out the episode guide. We redid the episode guide recently so you can actually go through and navigate and find other episodes, find different kinds of interviews based on crew position, like director, composer, writer, whatever. You seem to like this new system, right, Drew?
I thought it was amazing. I thought it was it's a really fun way to, maybe you've heard all the episodes or maybe you're looking for a specific angle to re-listen. I think it was super helpful. It's really cool. It's very easy to use. And obviously, while you're on the website, you're getting a little tired. You're just looking around. Maybe you want a little something to cheer you up. Go to the store. It's linked through our website, right, Charles? You get a hat, a T-shirt, what have you.
Or you can get a pillow. My pillow came in the mail, actually. I'll have to show it to you later, but it's a good one. I'm excited. I got a little pillow for my office with Ethan running
around. Well, I would also say you might want to perhaps get a piece of merchandise sooner rather than later. It helps the show.
It helps the show, and maybe it won't always be available. We'll see. I don't know.
Yeah, so do that. And also subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening to this podcast. And we'll be back next week for Bryan Burk Part 2.
Thanks again for listening, everyone. Before we go, another mission, should you choose to accept it, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember that you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at LightTheFusePod, and email us questions or comments at lightthefusepodcast@gmail.com. This message will self-destruct in 5 seconds.